I've got a theory that if you give 100% all of the time, somehow things will work out in the end. Hi everyone, my name is Darren. For those of you who are new to the channel, I am a recent Year 12 graduate from Scotch College based in Melbourne, Australia, and starting in about a week, I will be beginning medicine at Monash University. What you just heard was a quote from Celtics basketball legend Larry Bird, and I think it's an important one to students, to VCE, and to many tasks in life in general. If you give 100% of the effort, everything will work out in the end. And I think the really important part is in the end. Sometimes you really just have to put in, all the time, you really have to put in consistent work. And sometimes the results may not show immediately. And I found that was the case in some of my subjects. Like English, I'd work really hard, but my essays weren't climbing up and weren't shooting up in quality. But you really need to persist with it. And either things will work out in the end, and that's great, and you get better. And even if they don't, you don't have any regrets. And that is one of the really important motivating factors, is to not have any regrets. So I think quotes are really cool. They're sort of an insight into the mindset of these really hardworking and really successful people. So when I come upon good ones, I'll be sure to share them with you guys every now and then. So we actually hit two major milestones in the last couple of days. One is 200 subscribers and two is 2,000 views on the first video, which is crazy. So thank you guys so much. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about one of the major sacs, which is about to happen for many of you, and that is the English language short answer sac. So I actually picked up English language in year 12, which is really late, but I found it a very rewarding subject and I thoroughly enjoyed the whole journey as well. So I'd like to give some advice and some tips on how to prepare, because if English language is your only English, it will have to be in your top 4, and this first sac is an important stepping stone into doing well. So today's video will be split into 2 parts. In the first part, I'll talk about what you can do to prepare for the sac in terms of revision, and in the second part, I'll be talking about how to do the sac, so sort of time allocation and what to do in reading time and what to do with the questions when you see them. Enjoy. So first up, what I recommend in terms of revision for the English language short answer sac. So there are 2 main parts that I recommend you should do in terms of revision, and also what I did. First is getting acquainted with all the meta language, and second is doing a lot of practice questions and a lot of practice sacs. So in terms of meta language, the VCAA study design for English language units 3 and 4 is your Bible here. Print it out and make sure you understand every single piece of meta language that is on those 2 sheets of paper. So that's assimilation, nominalization, anaphoric referencing. You need to be acquainted and know every single one of them to do well. But as I say to all my students, simply understanding the meta language is not enough. You have to be able to recall it. And that's because a lot of the time the questions don't tell you what exactly to look for, but you need to be able to know what to look for. So this is particularly true in patterning questions like semantic patterning, lexical patterning, syntactic patterning. So for syntactic patterning, if it asks, identify an instance of syntactic patterning between lines 6 and 18, you need to know that you need to look for listing or antithesis or parallelism. And you need to know all 3, be able to recall all 3, because the question won't tell you any of them. And if within those lines there's not a listing, there's no antithesis, then you need to be able to know that, I need to look for parallelism because that's another type that exists. So this is very true for meta language like coherence, like cohesion, where these are like umbrella terms, and underneath there are so many specific meta language terms. And so questions often ask you to, how is coherence created, or how is cohesion enhanced? And you need to be able to know the specific meta language or in the specific techniques you need to look for, which support cohesion and which support coherence. So ways to remember this, if you're good at rote learning, then just rote learn it. You're using flashcards or Anki or whatever helps you. For me, I like using acronyms. So for example, for syntactic patterning, my acronym was LAP, L-A-P. And so that would make it really easy for me to remember listing, antithesis, parallelism. When a question crops up, I just go through those 3 and see whether they exist in the lines given. And of course, once you've understood the meta language and once you're comfortable with all types of meta language, then it's time to dive right into the practice questions and the practice sacs. Now this is really important for a couple reasons. One reason is you can see sort of how your teacher marks and what your teacher is looking for. because each teacher is slightly different, and your teacher's going to be looking at your sacs and is going to know what your school wants. So it's good to get feedback straight from them. Secondly, there are like types of questions that sort of recur in English language, and there's a certain structure for answering them. For example, a lot of the questions, they simply require you to give a technique and give an explanation, and that gives you the 2 marks. And if it's 4 marks, sometimes it's technique, explanation. So there's certain structures for that. And sometimes you might need to answer with a broad statement at the start, but there's like a limited number of types of these questions. So once you become acquainted with them, once you've practiced with them, when you see a question in your SAC, you'll know exactly how to structure your answer. And thirdly, it's just good to test your meta-language knowledge. Doing a lot of practice questions, doing a lot of practice SACs, it solidifies your understanding of meta-language, because knowing them is one thing, knowing like what nominalization is cool, but being able to identify it is slightly different, and through doing that, you'll be able to solidify your knowledge and get better with it so that you can find features more quickly in the SAC. And also because oftentimes there are multiple features that are all nominalization, so you'll learn to know which ones do you pick, which ones are not as good as the other ones. So that really helps as well. And fourthly, doing practice questions and practice SACs really helps timing wise. You'll learn how much you can spare, how much time you can spare, and how much you can write for 4 marks, for 2 marks, for 6 marks, to be able to stay on top of your time and to finish in time. And that continued practice is pretty true for any subject really. You learn how to pace yourself and time yourself so that you manage to finish all the questions. Also, I recommend in the initial stages when you're doing practice questions, when it asks for things like syntactic patterning, then write out what syntactic patterning is, so then you know what to look for. I actually did that in my actual SAC as well, because I was new to English language and I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So things like discourse features, then write out a couple discourse features above the question, so that you can refer back to them when you look to the text to try and find the techniques. So as with actual SAC techniques, so taking the SAC, I'll split this into reading time and writing time. I'll focus a bit more on reading time because as working through practice questions and practice SACs, you should sort of develop your own style of taking the SAC and also learn how you answer different types of questions. If in terms of SAC technique, you're wondering the mentality and what you should be doing before the SAC, right before the SAC, and right after the SAC, please check out this video here. So in terms of reading time, what I did was first I'd read the context very closely, because that really helps with a lot of the questions you get, such as relationship between speakers or the formality of the text. The context often helps a lot. Well, yeah, a lot of the time it helps a lot. And after that, I'd briefly read the whole text. So usually it's quite long, whether it's spoken or written. I wouldn't read it very carefully. I just get a gist of it, who's talking or what type of language is being used, and just get a feel for the text as a whole. Then I'd read through the questions. I'd see whether any questions particularly catch my eye, if any of them are really hard. And when I see things like I mentioned before, semantic patterning, syntactic patterning, I think to myself what they are, and I ask myself, should I write this down when writing time starts so I don't forget? So it's little options like that. After that, if I have any difficult questions that I can't really get a grasp on, I will go to the text and see if I can find techniques or find meta-language to support my answer for those difficult questions. If it's all fairly straightforward and I know I can do all the questions, then I just go from the start, so question 1, and then I read through the text more carefully and try and find how I would answer question 1 or what meta-language I would use in each question. So with regards to writing time, one thing that's pretty important is to pace yourself. So the actual SAC might be easier or might be harder than we've done in the past, and it's really important to take that into account and note to yourself that, okay, I should spend less time per question because there are so many questions, or I can't afford to spend much time being very picky with my techniques because the questions are all really long and really hard, so I have to be quick. So the one thing you don't want to do is to run out of time, and it's really important to get a grasp on how hard the SAC is during sort of reading time, so that during writing time you can pace it much better. Something that I would urge you to practice through your practice questions, I got better at this. I got quite good at this at the end of the year, not so much for the SAC because I was sort of new to the course, but I kind of want to pass this on to you guys so you guys get it early. And that is to be able to predict your answers. And what I mean by that is with some questions, you can kind of guess what the answer is, and then it becomes much easier to find techniques, because if you know what you're trying to prove, then it's much easier to find evidence. So for example, if a question asks about the turn taking, or let's say there's a text and it's a radio host who's invited people on and is just chatting to them. And so the question is, how does the nature of turn taking reflect the relationships between the participants? And so you can kind of predict the answer here, which is that the radio host is going to be asking a lot of questions, inviting people to take the floor, and sort of giving up the floor to the interviewees. And the interviewees will be holding the floor, will be changing, will be holding the floor, and also the interviewer will probably be giving them a lot of encouragement and encouraging them to keep holding onto the floor through things like back channeling, and also gives questions which encourage them to elaborate on what they've said. And through that, you can go back to your text. So reading the question without looking at the text, that's what you should be thinking. And then when you go to the text, it's much easier to find these examples and use them in your answer. Finally, with writing time in the actual SAC, I would be aware of the power of impressions. So throughout the SAC, you'll read the text a lot of times. So you'll read it during reading time. You'll read it towards the end of reading time, when you're sort of going through the questions. You'll read it each time you do a new question, and so you'll have an impression of some of the techniques, which just naturally happens. So I take advantage of that. In a later question, you might suddenly recall something you saw earlier. So just go straight to that part in the text and see if it is what you can use and what you really wanted. So just be aware of the power of impressions, and it can really help you out in the actual SAC. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's video. There's not many schools that teach English language, not many kids who do it. So I hope you found today's video useful. English language is an incredibly rewarding subject, and I really enjoyed studying it. Shout out to the person who recommended that I do it. He knows who he is. If you've enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Good luck for your SACs, and I'll see you all next time.